The wind howled through the pine trees as my hands tightened around the roll of fencing wire. I was shaking, not from the cold, but from rage. In front of me, stretched across my own land, was the brand new welcome sign for the Green Pasture Estates HOA. It stood right where my cattle used to graze. My jaw clenched as I read the gold letters out loud. Private community, entry for residents only. Right below that was a plaque with a name I would never forget. Property donated by Karen Bailey, Vice President, Green Pasture HOA. Donated. It was my land, my 80-acre ranch. My father's blood, sweat, and calluses had soaked into this soil long before HOA boards and gated neighborhoods existed. But somehow, through lies, manipulation, and a twisted HOA loophole, Karen Bailey had managed to hand over a portion of my property to her son. And now I was standing at the border, staring at construction workers building walking trails through my pasture, benches under my walnut trees, and concrete posts right through my barn ruins. They thought I'd back down. They didn't know that I had already filed a new property map at the county office, one that drew a giant fence straight through their HOA headquarters. And today I had come to build it. I took one step forward, planted the first metal post into the ground, and smiled. What happened next would shake the entire HOA board to their core. Let me tell you how it all started. My name, Howard Jenkins. Most folks around these parts just call me Old Man Howie. I'm 76 years old, retired, and spent nearly my entire life on the same patch of Texas land my grandfather homesteaded back in the 1920s. I live alone in a one-story ranch house surrounded by cattle fencing, pecan trees, and a rusty red barn that leans a little more every year. It's not fancy, but it's home. For decades, it was quiet out here. Neighbors waved at each other from tractors, not Teslas. Kids chased chickens, not HOA fines. We kept to ourselves and respected each other's land. But a few years ago, things changed. Developers started buying up land left and right. Acres of prairie were flattened into concrete pads. Out popped fancy subdivisions with names like the Oaks, Whispering Springs, and Green Pasture Estates. I watched one rise right next to the southern tip of my ranch. At first, I didn't mind. I figured, live and let live. But then came the letters. First, it was noise complaints about my rooster. Then they claimed my tractor's exhaust was a nuisance. They even had the nerve to ask if I could paint my barn a more HOA-compliant color. I laughed and tossed every letter in the trash. Then came the woman herself, Karen Bailey. Late 50s, bleach blonde bob haircut, high heels on a gravel road. She strutted onto my property like she owned it, holding a clipboard and chewing peppermint gum like it owed her money. "Hi there, I'm Karen, Vice President of the Green Pasture Estates HOA, she announced with a blinding smile. I stared at her. "You're on my land." "Well," she giggled, "technically, we might have a bit of an overlap issue. Our new property survey says that the southern field of your ranch was, actually part of the community common area." I squinted. "That field, been in my family since 1931. "Yes, but our surveyor found a discrepancy in the deed lines. It looks like no one updated your boundary when the county changed mapping systems back in the 70s. Easy mistake, but lucky for us, it means that southern section's open for donation or development." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I didn't donate anything." "Oh, but you don't have to," she said sweetly. "We can file a motion with the HOA board, and with enough support, it automatically becomes community land under Article 8 of our expansion charter." I paused. "You're expanding?" "Oh yes," she said, eyes sparkling. "Green Pasture is growing rapidly. We've already broken ground on new homes, and we want to include parks, trails, and amenities. Your field would make a beautiful walking path. Oh, and my son recently moved back from California. He's a fitness trainer, and he needs land to start his wellness center. Wouldn't that be exciting?" She looked around like she was seeing the future. I was seeing red. I escorted her off my land that day, not gently. But a few weeks later, I got a letter from the county. It said a parcel of my land had been reclassified and allocated to Green Pasture Estates under a joint-use agreement. Karen had done it. She had used a bunch of legal mumbo-jumbo and connections at the county clerk's office to steal my land and gift it to her son. I wanted to fight, but lawyers are expensive and time was ticking. So I did the only thing I could. I started digging. I read every document, every deed, every HOA charter. I filed public records requests, spent days in the county records office, and I found something. Their headquarters, the Green Pasture Estates HOA office building, sat on a thin strip of land that was never properly transferred during their development deal. Technically, it was still tagged as Jenkins Holding Area B. My grandfather's survey map marked it clearly. It was mine, and I could legally enclose it. So I got to work. I filed updated coordinates, re-recorded the deed, and submitted a request to install a security fence for livestock safety. Now, as I stood there driving metal posts into the dirt, I heard a car door slam behind me. I turned. Karen was storming toward me in her wedge heels, red-faced, swinging her clipboard like a weapon. "What do you think you're doing?" she screeched. I didn't answer. I just held up a copy of the deed and pointed toward the survey marker. Then I smiled and hammered the next post. "Where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. Let's see how far this story is traveling." Karen's heels crunched over the gravel as she stomped toward me, her rage bubbling like a pot about to boil over. "You can't do this," she shrieked, face turning redder by the second. "This is our land, HOA property, you're trespassing." I kept my hand on the post driver and looked her dead in the eyes. "Actually, Karen," I said calmly, pulling out the manila folder from my jacket pocket, "this right here says different." I handed her the deed. It was worn and creased from all the hands it had passed through, lawyers, county clerks, even a friendly historian from the local museum who helped verify it. She snatched it and read it furiously, lips moving fast as her eyes darted line to line. Then she froze. I watched the color drain from her face. "Jenkins Holding Area B," she muttered. "That's impossible, this must be outdated." "Nope," I said, picking up another metal post. "Updated, notarized, and stamped last Friday. Your HOA office sits on my land, and under state law, I have the right to secure my property line. That includes the right to build a fence." Her mouth opened and closed like a goldfish out of water. But there's a permit required for construction like this," she finally managed. "I got it," I said, tapping the laminated permit now nailed to a tree near the first post. "County approved it the same day I filed the deed." Karen looked like she was about to explode. "You don't know who you're messing with," she hissed. "You have no idea the kind of people I know. The board, my lawyer, my son." I cut her off. "Your son built his yoga dome on land that didn't belong to him." Her nostrils flared. "I'll call the sheriff." "You go right ahead," I said, walking back to my truck to get another coil of wire. "I'll be here, building my fence around my land." She stood there, breathing heavy, clutching that clipboard like it was a lifeline. And then she left. But I knew that wasn't the end. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of sirens. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my hat, and stepped outside to see two sheriff deputies and a familiar black SUV parked in my driveway. Karen stood beside it, arms folded, smug as ever. "Mr. Jenkins," one of the deputies said, "we got a call about unauthorized construction on community property." I sighed. "I expected this, let me show you something." I handed him the same folder I'd given Karen. Deed, permit, county approval, it was all there in black and white. The deputy took his time flipping through it. His partner looked over his shoulder. Karen's grin slowly faded. "Well," she asked impatiently, "arrest him." The deputy looked at her and shook his head. "No crime here, ma'am. Mr. Jenkins is within his rights. His paperwork checks out." But the HOA owns that building. That's our headquarters." He raised an eyebrow. "Then it's on land you don't own. You'll need to take it to civil court if you want to challenge it. As for now, he can keep building." I tipped my hat. "Thank you, officer." Karen fumed. "You'll regret this, Howard Jenkins," she spat, turning on her heels and marching back to her SUV. Now I'll admit the victory felt good, real good. But it didn't last long. That night, around 11 p.m., I got a call from my neighbor, Judy. She was breathless. "Howard," she whispered, I saw some men on your south field, flashlights, looked like they were cutting something. I jumped in my truck, rifle across the seat, not to use, just to show. By the time I got there, they were gone, but the damage was done. 3 of my freshly planted fence posts had been yanked out, wire was cut, markers removed. And in the dirt were tire tracks. I followed them with my flashlight and stopped cold. They led straight to Karen's son's trailer. Oh, it was on now. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I put on my Sunday church clothes, buttoned shirt, clean jeans, polished boots, and drove into town, not to the sheriff this time. I had a different stop. I walked into the office of Greg Mattheis, county zoning commissioner, and my old high school fishing buddy. Howard Jenkins, he said, standing up and shaking my hand, what brings you in? I explained everything, the stolen land, the bogus HOA claim, the sabotage on my fence. And then I dropped the kicker. I want to file an official cease and desist against the Green Pasture HOA for trespassing, unlawful construction, and land misuse. And I want a motion for an emergency injunction to freeze all development on my property until this is resolved in court. Greg leaned back and whistled. You sure you want to go that far? I nodded. I'm done being pushed around. He nodded. All right, let's get to work. By the end of the week, the injunction was filed. Work on Karen's son's dome stopped. HOA board meetings were flooded with angry homeowners demanding answers. And I kept building my fence. But just when I thought I was making progress, another storm hit. A big one. I came home one afternoon to find my barn, what was left of it, on fire. Flames roared into the sky as neighbors tried to help with hoses. We got it out, but the damage was done. The roof was gone, my tractor melted, my tools ash. I stood in silence, smoke curling around me, fists clenched at my side. And then I found the gas can. Empty, red. With a label that read, Property of Green Pasture Maintenance Department. The smell of burnt timber clung to the air like a bitter memory that wouldn't leave. I stood there, unmoving, watching the smoke rise from what used to be my barn. It wasn't just a building. It held decades of tools, old saddles from my father's rodeo days, even the first pair of boots I ever owned, now charred black and curled like dried leaves. But I wasn't crying, not today. I was past tears. I picked up the red gas can, turned it in my hands, and stared at the white printed label, Property of Green Pasture Maintenance Department. I didn't need a detective to tell me what had happened. This wasn't just an act of petty revenge. This was war. And I was ready. That night I sat alone on my porch with a notebook, a pen, and a lamp buzzing faintly above my head. I had already filed the injunction to stop all HOA construction, and my new property line had been officially recorded. But if they were willing to set fire to my barn, I needed to hit back harder. Legally, visibly, strategically. That's when I got the idea that changed everything. If Karen wanted to weaponize the HOA rules, then I'd use those rules to crush her from the inside out. I started early the next morning. I drove down to the county's public planning department and requested every public document tied to Green Pasture Estates development, permits, community covenants, environmental assessments, infrastructure plans. The young woman at the desk blinked at me. That's over 300 pages, sir. I'll wait, I said, smiling. 3 hours later, I walked out with a box full of binders. Back at the ranch, I started combing through them. And it didn't take long before I hit gold. Page 47, Section 6A of their community covenant. Any public use structure, park, or office built upon miszoned or unverified land must undergo review every 5 years and is subject to re-evaluation by the county or neighboring stakeholders. Bingo, that meant their headquarters wasn't just sitting on my land illegally, it also violated their own rules. But I wasn't done. I kept reading. Buried deep in the documents were 2 more violations. Noise complaints that exceeded HOA decibel limits during Karen's son's yoga boot camps. Unauthorized grading of soil near a protected wetlands area, which Karen signed off on without county approval. She had no idea how bad she'd messed up. And now I had the receipts. I met with Greg Matthijs again the next day. I laid the files in front of him and pointed to each violation. He gave a low whistle. "This is solid, Howie, real solid." "I want to file for a county-led investigation," I said, "and I want the HOA board notified in writing." Greg nodded. "I'll start the process, but be careful. Karen's already feeling cornered. This could make things worse." I looked him square in the eyes. "Let her come." 2 days later, I got a visit. But it wasn't Karen. It was her son, Tyler Bailey. 32, gym body, tan like a beach bum but angry like a snake. He drove up in a black SUV with the words, "Bailey Fit Retreat," plastered across the side. He didn't knock, just came stomping up my porch and got in my face. "You think you're funny, old man," he sneered, filing lawsuits and fencing off property like it's a game. I didn't move. "Step off my porch." He didn't. "I don't care what piece of paper you have. You're just some wrinkly hick with a grudge. My mom owns this neighborhood. You think people are gonna side with you? A nobody with a rotting house and no future." I stared at him a long time. "You done?" He smirked. "You've got no idea what's coming." He turned to leave, but before he hit the stairs, I added one last thing. "I do, actually." He stopped. "I saw the gas can," I said quietly. "Next time, bring a lawyer instead of matches." He didn't respond. He just drove off, tires screeching on my gravel road. The County Review Board officially notified the HOA a week later. An investigation was underway, and HOA activities would be frozen until further notice. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. She went on a charm offensive. She hosted community gatherings to spread lies about me, telling folks I was a bitter recluse, that I'd forged documents, that I hated the neighborhood and wanted to destroy their way of life. But I wasn't playing defense anymore. I called the local news. Reporter by the name of Denise Morrison came out with a camera crew and sat with me under my pecan tree. I told her everything, showed her the paperwork, the maps, even the charred remains of my barn. She aired the story 2 days later. Rancher battles HOA over stolen land, one man's fight for justice. And that's when things really started to shift. People started stopping by. Strangers, neighbors, folks from across the state. One man brought me a new set of hand tools. A retired judge mailed me a letter of support with a $100 bill inside. Even some of the green pasture residents came quietly, ashamed. "I didn't know," one woman whispered. "I thought the land was donated." Another man gave me photos of Karen's son building illegally on days that violated noise ordinances. Karen's house of cards was falling fast. But she had one last card to play. One morning, I woke up to find a giant FOR sale sign staked on my driveway, with my name on it. And beneath it, in bold red letters, "Pending foreclosure." I stood there, blinking at it. They faked a foreclosure notice. It even had a QR code leading to a bogus listing page claiming my property was being sold due to unpaid community dues. I ripped it out of the ground and stormed straight to the county clerk. Greg looked like he was about to blow a gasket. "This is criminal. She's impersonating official documents now." "I want charges pressed," I said. He nodded, already working on it. 3 days later, Karen got served, on camera, while walking into her precious HOA office. The news picked it up again. HOA president faces legal heat for forgery and land theft. It was over. Or so I thought. I was working on repairing my back fence when I saw them. 5 men in safety vests and hard hats, spray painting marks along my western line. I walked up, hands on my hips. "Can I help you fellas?" One of them looked nervous. We were told to mark out space for a walking trail." "By who?" He glanced at the clipboard. "Karen Bailey." I chuckled. "You might want to read that news article before you finish that job." And then I handed them each a printed copy of the county investigation letter. They packed up and left. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I got a knock on my door. This time it was different. It was Alan Ray's, head of the county board himself. He held a folder and a smile. "Howard," he said, shaking my hand, "I wanted to give you this in person." Inside was a letter of resolution. Corinne Bailey was officially removed as HOA vice president. Tyler's development permit was revoked. The office headquarters scheduled for demolition pending relocation. I looked at Alan. "You serious?" He nodded. "Your fence will stand, Howie, you won." But before he left, Alan hesitated. "There is one more thing," he said slowly. My eyes narrowed. "Go on." "Corinne's suing for emotional distress. Civil court, private hearing. She wants damages for your public humiliation." I couldn't help it. I laughed, long and loud. "Good," I said, wiping my eyes, "because I've got one more surprise for her too." He raised an eyebrow. "I just bought the adjacent lot behind the HOA office through a land trust. She doesn't know it's me yet." Alan whistled. "What are you planning?" I smiled, teeth showing now. "I'm fencing it in, from all four sides." The courthouse smelled like old wood, floor polish, and the faint scent of someone's too strong cologne. I adjusted my bolo tie and took a seat in the front row of the small claims courtroom. It was a private civil hearing, no reporters, no jury, just me, a judge, a court recorder, and across the aisle, Corinne Bailey. She sat with her legs crossed tightly, wearing a sharp grey pantsuit and a scowl that could shatter glass. Her lawyer, a young man who looked like he practiced most of his speeches in front of a mirror, shuffled a pile of papers and whispered in her ear. She didn't look at me once. But that was all right. I wasn't here for eye contact. I was here to finish something. The bailiff announced the case. Corinne Bailey versus Howard Jenkins, emotional distress, reputational damage, and targeted harassment. I let out a quiet snort. The judge, a short, no-nonsense woman in her late 60s named Judge Franklin, adjusted her glasses and gave Corinne's lawyer the nod to begin. And oh, did he begin. "Your Honor, this man," the young lawyer said, pointing dramatically at me, "has waged a personal vendetta against my client. He has humiliated her publicly, ruined her standing in the HOA, defamed her in the media, and caused irreparable damage to her mental health. She has suffered panic attacks, insomnia, and community isolation, and we have medical documentation to prove it." He pulled out a folder and handed it to the judge. Corinne leaned forward, her lips pursed as if bracing for applause. Judge Franklin flipped through it side and set it aside. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, turning to me, "your response." I stood up slowly, holding the thick folder I'd brought. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this isn't a story of emotional distress. It's a story of theft, fraud, arson, and the worst kind of neighborly abuse I've ever seen in my 76 years on this earth." Corinne scoffed loudly. Judge Franklin shot her a look that could kill weeds. I opened my folder. I have copies of the original deed proving my land ownership, including the section their HOA office was illegally built on. I have notarized documents, zoning maps, county permits, and photographs. I have emails from residents confirming they were misled by Mrs. Bailey, and I have video surveillance footage of a man, later identified as her son, trespassing and vandalizing my property the night before my barn burned down. Corinne's eyes flicked toward her lawyer. I laid the stack on the judge's desk with a satisfying thump. "And I have a statement from the fire department," I added, confirming the fire was started with gasoline. The gas can found on my property had a label that read, "Property of Green Pasture Maintenance Department." Judge Franklin looked over the pile. "All of this has been filed." "Yes, ma'am, verified by county officials." She looked at Corinne's lawyer. "Anything else?" The poor man wilted. "No, Your Honor." Judge Franklin turned back to Corinne. "Mrs. Bailey, consider yourself lucky Mr. Jenkins isn't suing you. Case dismissed. No damages awarded. And I strongly advise you to avoid further action unless you want to see yourself on the defendant's side next time." She banged her gavel. Court adjourned. Corinne didn't say a word as she stormed past me outside the courthouse. Her heels clicked like gunshots against the tile floor. I watched her walk toward her SUV, shoulders stiff, jaw locked. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the fire, the forged foreclosure sign, the years of bullying, gaslighting, and lies. So instead, I took a slow breath and drove straight to the land trust office. It was time for my final move. Remember the surprise I mentioned? The land parcel directly behind the green pasture HOA office, the one I bought through a trust. Well, hear what happened next. I hired a contractor named Bill, an old buddy of mine from Amarillo, who owed me a favor for helping him settle his father's estate. Bill specialized in creative fencing jobs, barbed wire, picket, even privacy hedges for wealthy folks who didn't want nosy neighbors. I called him the morning after court. Bill, I said, I want a fence, 12 feet high, all around the new lot behind green pasture, and I want it done fast. How fast? 3 days fast. Gotcha, he said. What kind? Chain link with privacy slats, no gate, no exit. There was silence. Wait, you're boxing in the HOA office? I grinned, yes sir. He laughed so hard, I had to hold the phone away from my ear. By the end of the week, the fence was up. 4 solid sides, 12 feet tall, reinforced with concrete posts and no exterior gate. It completely boxed in the HOA office, which now sat like a lost island in a sea of fencing. Employees inside had to walk across the lawn, climb over a temporary ladder, and hop down to reach their cars. Karen tried calling the sheriff. They came out, inspected everything, and left without a word. Why? Because I owned that land. It was legally mine, and there was no law that said I had to provide access to a building illegally placed there. She filed a complaint with the county board. It was denied. She tried hiring a lawyer again. He quit after 3 days when I sent him copies of every legal filing I had. That fence stayed right where it was. But I wasn't done. With Karen out of power and the HOA falling apart, residents started holding their own meetings. Without her, they voted to dissolve the current board and start fresh. And they offered me something unexpected. Mr. Jenkins, one of them said, a soft-spoken nurse named Melissa, we want you on the new board. I nearly choked on my coffee. Me on an HOA board. She smiled. We trust you, you care about this land, you didn't back down. I thought about it long and hard. And then I agreed. Not for power, not for control, but to make sure no one ever went through what I did again. The first order of business. Rewriting the HOA charter to prevent any single officer from making property decisions without majority votes and third-party verification. The second. Approving a budget to restore my barn. With community volunteers, donated tools, and some local fundraising, my barn was rebuilt in just under 2 months, stronger, better, and more beautiful than ever. As for Karen and her son, Tyler sold his yoga dome and moved out of state. Rumor is he opened a CrossFit gym in Arizona. I wish him well, as long as he stays far away. Karen quietly put her house on the market. It sat unsold for months. Nobody wanted to live next to the man who fenced off the entire HOA. Eventually, she left town. No goodbye, no apology. Just silence, which suited me just fine. One quiet evening, I sat on my porch sipping sweet tea as the sun dipped behind the hills. Birds chirped in the distance, and the scent of sawdust still lingered from the barn repairs. Melissa dropped by with her husband and kids. They brought pie. Another neighbor came by with firewood for the upcoming winter. One by one, folks who once believed the lies came to shake my hand. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Appreciate you standing up. You showed us what real backbone looks like. I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd survived, with my land, my dignity, and my principles intact. But just as I thought the story had reached its end, a new letter arrived. This time not from Karen. From a land developer. Offering to buy my ranch. For 10 times its value. The envelope was crisp and white, sitting alone in my mailbox like it didn't know it was about to start a fire. I didn't recognize the sender at first. Linton Ridge Capital Group, fancy name, cold sounding. I tore it open standing by the fence, just steps away from the new barn we'd rebuilt with volunteer sweat and laughter. The paper inside was heavy stock, printed in elegant serif font. Dear Mr. Jenkins, Our firm, Linton Ridge Capital Group, is interested in acquiring your property located at 371 Willow Ridge Road for future development purposes. We understand the recent events regarding your property and commend your perseverance. We would like to offer you a sum of $8.2 million USD, contingent upon your agreement to vacate the land within 90 days and allow full access to our architectural and survey teams. Sincerely, Ellis Drew, Senior Partner. $8.2 million. My mouth went dry. That was more money than I'd ever seen in one place, more than I'd ever dreamed of seeing, and they didn't want just a portion of my land, they wanted the entire ranch. I sat on the porch and read it again, then again. It didn't make sense. Why now? That's when it hit me. Karen was gone, the HOA was leaderless, the residents were still reeling from the embarrassment, the office was fenced in and unusable. Green Pasture Estates was weak. And this developer smelled blood. I called Greg Mattheis that afternoon and read him the letter. Linton Ridge, he muttered, they're notorious, quiet buyouts, bulldozers overnight, they don't build communities, Howard, they build boxes stacked on boxes. I sighed, they offered me $8 million, Greg. He paused, that's life-changing. I know. You thinking of taking it? I looked out at the fields, the fence line, the grazing cattle, and the oak tree my father planted when I was born. I don't know. For the next week, I couldn't sleep. I went on long walks around the property, listening to the sounds of cicadas and crunching leaves. Everything felt heavier, even the breeze. People started to find out. Melissa stopped by. Please don't sell to them, Mr. Jenkins. If they take your land, we'll be surrounded by concrete. The trails, the peace, it'll all be gone. Old Curtis from down the road came by with a six-pack and sat with me under the porch. You'd be a fool not to take it, he said. Ain't nothing out here but aches and taxes. Even my nephew called from out in El Paso. Uncle Howie, he said, you could retire anywhere. A cabin in Colorado, a condo in Florida, think about it. And I did. But every time I tried to picture myself somewhere else, I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just land. It was my family's story, my father's sweat, my mother's laughter under the old pecan tree, my first kiss behind the silo, my dog Rex, buried near the west pasture with a wooden cross I carved by hand. You can't put a price on memories. And yet here I was, with a price in my hand. I didn't reply to the letter, not yet. Instead, I requested a meeting. Linton Ridge agreed. They sent out a man named Ellis Drew, the same one who signed the letter. Tall, smooth, wore a navy suit despite the Texas sun. He arrived in a Tesla, stepping out like he'd never gotten mud on his shoes in his life. Mr. Jenkins, he said, all confidence and cologne, thank you for inviting me to speak. We sat under the walnut tree. He refused the lemonade I offered. Let me get straight to it, he said. You've had a rough few months, we understand. Karen Bailey and her group made your life miserable. The community disrespected you. You've done an amazing job defending yourself. I raised an eyebrow. You know a lot for someone who's never stepped foot out here until now. He chuckled. We do our homework. I bet you do, I said, folding my arms. Why this land, why now? He leaned in. Because your property is the last piece. We've bought out everything around Green Pasture Estates, all the remaining undeveloped lots. The HOA is crumbling. With your land, we can build a luxury lakefront expansion, hundreds of new homes, a private golf course, even a shopping center. I blinked. There's no lake. There will be, he said. We've already drafted plans to reroute the water retention system and create an artificial lake along the southern basin, right through your pasture. I stared at him. You'd drown my land. He smiled. We'd transform it. He handed me a glossy folder. Inside was a rendering, digital mock-ups of shiny homes, tennis courts, winding roads, a clubhouse, right over my family's fields. And at the center of it all, a cul-de-sac named Jenkins Circle. Call it a tribute, he said. I stood up. Meeting over. Mr. Jenkins. You came out here in your pretty shoes and your pretty car thinking this place was just dirt and profit. But this land breathes, it remembers, and it doesn't belong to you. He stood brushing off imaginary dust. You'll come around, everyone does, eventually. He left. I stood watching the dust trail disappear for a long time. The next day, I called a town meeting at the community church hall. Over 100 people showed up. HOA members, green pasture residents, old farmers, newcomers. I walked to the front and held up the folder Ellis left behind. "They want to buy me out," I said, "and turn all of this into a concrete lake." Gasps, whispers, one woman shouted, "No." I nodded. They offered $8 million, and yes, it's tempting. I've lived a simple life, could retire easy, but this isn't just my fight anymore. I opened the folder, then dropped it in the trash. This is our land, and we're going to protect it. The room exploded with applause. A week later, I formed a land preservation trust with the help of local lawyers and donations from residents. We registered the ranch as a heritage property, protected from commercial development for the next 99 years. Linton Ridge tried again, offering $10 million this time, then 15. I didn't answer. Instead, I fenced the rest of the western border and built a small community garden with Melissa and her family. Kids planted squash and carrots where Karen's son once held yoga classes. The air felt cleaner. The land breathed easier. But just as the dust was settling, another letter arrived. This one wasn't about buying land. It was a lawsuit, filed in federal court. Linton Ridge versus Howard Jenkins, for obstruction of development and defamation of corporate interests. I'd fought many battles in my life, weathered droughts, patched fences after storms, even survived a bar fight or two in my youth. But nothing prepared me for a federal courtroom packed with men in tailored suits, $10,000 watches, and cologne that smelled like ambition and gasoline. Linton Ridge Capital Group v. Howard Jenkins. The case made it all the way to the Federal District Court of Texas. Their claim that my land preservation trust and public media campaign had damaged their development rights, cost them millions in projected revenue, and constituted obstruction and defamation. Their goal wasn't just to punish me, it was to force me to sell. They wanted to set an example. I was just a symbol now, the man who stood in the way of progress. But I was also a man who didn't back down. The courtroom was ice cold, both literally and in spirit. On their side sat 6 lawyers, all polished, all young, all wearing matching silver pins. Ellis Drew, their lead, sat front and center. When our eyes met, he smirked. On my side, just me and my attorney, Catherine Morgan. Sharp as a nail, mid-40s, fiery red hair, and boots that clicked like thunder when she walked. She was local, country-raised, but had graduated top of her class at the University of Texas and once made a corporate developer cry during deposition. I liked her instantly. The judge, a stern black-robed man with sharp cheekbones and deep lines carved from years of nonsense, opened with a bang. This case will determine whether an individual, acting within their rights, may be bullied, coerced, or sued into submission by corporate intimidation. Let's begin. Ellis's lead counsel, a man named Grant Monroe, stood up and began his song. Your Honor, we recognize Mr. Jenkins's emotional attachment to his land. However, emotions do not override law. Our client entered this area in good faith, with approved investments, and now faces catastrophic losses because of one man's efforts to sabotage that progress through media manipulation and deliberate obstruction. I rolled my eyes. Catherine stood slowly when it was our turn. Your Honor, this is not a story about sabotage. It's a story about survival, about a man whose only crime was refusing to sell his grandfather's land to people who only see grass as dollar signs. Mr. Jenkins has followed every law, every code, every regulation, and now he's being dragged into court for daring to say no. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Proceed. For the next 2 days, the lawyers argued like roosters in a cage. Linton Ridge presented maps, surveys, charts, and even footage from a drone showing my fences and the obstructed office. They claimed my heritage trust blocked the economic future of the region. They even tried to blame me for the drop in property values in green pasture, like I was responsible for the HOA's collapse. But Catherine, she was a storm. She picked apart every document, questioned every permit, exposed every inconsistency. She brought forward emails between Ellis and Karen Bailey, where he promised her son a cut of the profits if she smoothed over zoning issues. The court went silent as those were read aloud. Karen's betrayal wasn't just local corruption, it was part of a much larger scheme. And then, the final blow came from me. Catherine called me to the stand. I stood behind the witness table, looked at the judge, and spoke from the chest. I'm not a rich man, never was, I'm a rancher. This land, it's my life. It's where my mother sang in the kitchen, where my father taught me how to fix a fence, where I buried my dog, my best friend, where I fed neighbors and raised cattle for 4 decades, and now these men want to drown it under a fake lake and call it progress. I paused and looked straight at Ellis. They don't want the land, they want the silence, they want to teach people like me to stop fighting. The room was quiet. And in that stillness, Catherine passed the judge one final document. It was a petition, signed by over 2,700 people from across Texas, ranchers, residents, veterans, and environmental groups, all in support of my preservation trust. The judge recessed for the night, said he'd deliver a ruling in the morning. That night I sat under the stars on the tailgate of my truck, staring at the fields. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. My mind kept spinning. What if I lost? What if they overruled the trust and forced a sale? Then a truck pulled up slowly beside mine. It was Melissa, the nurse who helped organize the garden. She handed me a warm slice of peach pie. "We've got your back," she said. Then Curtis arrived, then Judy, then the Rodriguez family with their 5 kids. By midnight, my yard was filled with over 30 people just sitting in silence, watching the stars, sharing pie, showing up. No signs, no protests. Just presence. It was the strongest statement anyone could make. The next morning, we returned to the courtroom. The judge entered, everyone rose, then sat. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and looked directly at Ellis Drew. This case concerns one of the oldest questions in American history. Does a person have the right to say no to power? He paused. After careful review of all evidence, testimonies, and legal filings, this court finds in favor of the defendant, Howard Jenkins. Gasp and cheers, tears. He slammed the gavel. Furthermore, the judge added, Linton Ridge Capital is ordered to pay Mr. Jenkins's legal fees, and a formal complaint will be submitted regarding their attempt to exploit preservation loopholes for corporate gain. Ellis's face turned gray. I just exhaled. Later that week, the media returned. Rancher beats billion-dollar developer in court. The story went viral. Messages poured in from around the country, farmers from Iowa, veterans in Colorado, a teacher from Kentucky who said she cried watching the clip. A publisher even reached out about a book deal. And as for me, I didn't cash out. I built more. With donated materials, I helped expand the garden into a full community orchard. We opened a local food stand, selling tomatoes, eggs, and pecans. We repainted the old silo with a mural of my grandfather's face and the words, "Land is life and worth the fight." The fence still stands, still wraps around the old HOA office. Now rusting, now quiet, just like it should be. But just when everything seemed peaceful, I received a new visitor. A woman, blonde, well-dressed. And when she stepped out of her car, I realized it was Karen Bailey. The gravel crunched under her heels as she walked across my driveway like she still owned every step of the land she once tried to steal. Karen Bailey. No longer the HOA president, no longer the queen bee of Green Pasture Estates, just a woman standing in front of the man she tried to bury with the same clipboard in her hand. She looked older now. Her once perfect blonde bob was streaked with gray, and there were dark shadows under her eyes, like sleep had become a stranger. But the expression on her face, that hadn't changed, cold, controlled, determined. I leaned against my porch rail and waited. She stopped about 10 feet from me, lifted her chin slightly, and said, "I want to talk." I didn't move. About what? My fences, the lawsuit, the barn fire. Her eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed even. about the future. I stared at her. Karen, you are the past. But she didn't leave. She held out an envelope. What's that? I asked. A proposal, she said. From me, not the HOA, not Linton Ridge, me. That surprised me, enough that I took a step down and snatched the envelope. I didn't open it yet. Karen folded her arms. Look, I made mistakes. I won't deny that. I let greed and power get in the way. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but I lost the plot. I raised an eyebrow. You gave away my land to your son, Karen. She looked away. I know. Silence stretched between us. Then she said something I didn't expect. My son disowned me. He blamed me for the collapse of his business. My husband moved to Denver last month, and the HOA, they voted to permanently remove me from any future board. I lost everything. I didn't speak. She looked back at me. I came because I want to make peace. I want to buy back 1 acre, just 1 acre, at the edge of your land, not for a business, not for development. I want to build a small cottage, just a place to live quietly, away from the noise, away from the mess I created. Now that was unexpected. I opened the envelope. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch of a tiny home, a list of eco-friendly materials, and a certified bank check for $180,000. Karen stood still, her voice softened. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Howard, just a second chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I thought maybe you'd hear me out. I looked at the check, at the sketch, then at her. I'll think about it. Her eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen in her before. Not anger, not superiority, but humility. She nodded. That's all I'm asking. Then she turned and left. That night I sat on my porch with a flashlight, staring at the sketch again. Part of me wanted to tear it in half. But another part, the part that still believed in redemption, kept asking. What if she's telling the truth? What if the storm has passed? I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I met with the new HOA board. Melissa, Curtis, and 3 others now ran things, calm, fair, open-minded. I told them about Karen's request, about the sketch, the check, her apology. They were silent for a moment, then Melissa said gently, do what feels right, Howard, but we support you, either way. Curtis chuckled. I still think she's got something up her sleeve, but hey, miracles happen. I walked the edge of my land that evening, the spot Karen had requested. It overlooked the southern basin, where sunlight poured down across the wild grass. It was peaceful, quiet, the kind of place a broken person might want to start over. And then I saw it. A white ribbon tied to one of the trees. Fresh. New. Like a marker. I scanned the area and spotted 3 more. Tied low, discreet. Survey markers. Someone had been measuring the land. Not for a cottage. For something else. My heart sank. I rushed back to the house, grabbed my field camera footage from the trail cameras I had hidden across my land. And there she was. Karen with 2 unfamiliar men in boots and work vests, pointing, measuring, writing notes. 2 days ago. Lying to my face, again. The check, the sketch, the fake vulnerability. It was another scam. But this time I wasn't going to wait for the courts. I picked up my phone and made 2 calls. First to Catherine, my lawyer. Second to the local paper. By the weekend, the headline read, Disgraced ex-HOA president caught in new land grab attempt. Trail cams reveal hidden plans. Karen's name was ruined for good. Whatever new life she hoped to build, shattered. She vanished after that. Left town. Nobody knows where she went. But I know one thing. She won't ever set foot on my land again. Weeks passed. Peace returned. We planted new pecan trees where the fire had scorched the earth. Children played in the garden. And I installed a new wooden sign at the front of my ranch. Welcome to Jenkins Ranch, protected by law, community, and camera. People still drive by just to take pictures of the fence. But for me, it's not about revenge anymore. It's about remembrance of what I stood for, what I saved, and what no one will ever take again. But then, one final letter arrived, stamped with a gold seal. From the governor's office. The envelope was thick, with an embossed seal glinting in gold across the front. Office of the Governor, State of Texas. I stood on my porch staring at it like it was about to explode. After all the courtroom battles, burned barns, fake apologies, and millions waved in my face, I thought I'd seen it all. I hadn't. I peeled the seal open with my pocket knife, hands rough but steady. The letter inside was printed on the kind of paper you don't throw away, rich, heavy, and official. Mr. Howard Jenkins, in light of your recent efforts to preserve not only your family's legacy, but also the surrounding environment and cultural landscape of your region, it is our pleasure to inform you that the Jenkins Ranch has been nominated for state recognition under the Texas Historical Preservation and Land Heritage Act. Pending a final hearing and inspection, your property may be designated as a protected historic site, qualifying for lifetime protections, tax exemption status, and educational tourism support. We would be honored to invite you to the state capitol next month for a formal presentation of this nomination. Sincerely, Governor Charles D. Mason. I had to sit down. Me, an old rancher, being invited to the capitol. I stared out at the land, the quiet hills, the garden, the rebuilt barn, the kids playing catch down the dirt path. All the battles, all the scars, and now this. For the first time in months, I felt peace. But I also knew one thing. A final inspection meant the state would be sending out a team. And the last time someone inspected my land, it was under a fake survey led by Karen. I wasn't taking chances this time. I called up my lawyer Catherine, and she laughed out loud when she heard. Mr. Jenkins, they don't just nominate anybody for this. They must have seen the news stories. This is legacy-level stuff. I want everything buttoned up before that team steps foot on my land, I said. I want it clean, clear, and locked. You got it, she said. I'll pull the land records, zoning confirmations, and even schedule an environmental consultant for a pre-inspection. We were going to do this the right way. News spread fast. Melissa dropped by with a pie. Curtis brought me an old Texas flag and said, "You better hang this up in your barn after that ceremony." Even the kids from Green Pasture Estates, the same HOA that once tried to push me out, painted a mural near the garden that said, "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins, for protecting our future." I'm not the emotional type, but I had to walk away for a minute, dust in my eyes, that's all. A week later, the inspection team arrived. 2 men in blazers and a woman with a clipboard, friendly, polite, but all business. They walked the full property with me, through the fields, across the rebuilt barn, around the garden and orchard, took pictures, asked questions. Then we came to the famous fence. The one wrapped around the old HOA office. They stopped and stared. "This is it, huh?" one of them chuckled. "That's the one," I said. "I call it poetic zoning." The woman smiled. Governor Mason mentioned this in his speech last week, said it was the boldest act of citizen-led preservation he'd seen in decades. I grinned. Well, I figured if you can't tear the machine down, fence it in. We shared a laugh. But just as we were about to head back, something caught my eye. A black SUV slowly crawling down the road, tinted windows, no plates on the front. It stopped near the southern tree line, then backed up and drove off. The woman frowned. "That's someone you know." "Nope," I said, "but I got cameras, we'll find out." That night, I checked the trail cams. The SUV had paused by the creek for about 40 seconds. A man had stepped out, couldn't see his face. He wore a hat and dark clothes, but he bent down and stuck something into the soil. I zoomed in. A flag, tiny, red. Like a survey marker. Again. I called Catherine immediately. "Another developer?" she asked. "Maybe, but something tells me this one ain't from around here." "What do you mean?" I paused. That SUV had a New York plate. Within 3 days, Catherine traced it. Brickwell Holdings. A corporate shell company based out of Manhattan. No phone number. No real website. But a trail of land grabs across 5 states, always under fake names, always through legal intimidation. And in every case, it started with a tiny red marker. They were coming for me. Again. This time from the top of the ladder, not HOA thugs, not Karen, not Ellis Drew. But something bigger, smarter, invisible. We took action fast. Catherine filed a cease and desist letter. We notified the State Inspection Board. We posted no trespassing notices across the property borders, updated the land trust terms, and submitted a report to the governor's office. And then 3 nights later, my power went out. Not the town's, just mine. I stepped outside with a flashlight and saw them, 2 figures sprinting through my south pasture. Trespassers. By the time I reached the field, they were gone, but they'd cut the power box, ripped the wires out. A warning. They didn't want the land. They wanted to scare me into leaving it. But I didn't scare easy. And I sure as hell wasn't moving. Instead, I doubled security, installed a motion-activated floodlight system, connected the camera feed to Catherine's office. I even got a visit from the sheriff, who promised regular patrols. But the real protection. The people. That Sunday, the entire town showed up for a potluck under the barn roof. Not a fundraiser. Not a protest. Just presence. Because when people show up for you, not out of duty, but out of love, you know you've already won. Then the day came. The state capitol ceremony. I wore my best denim, a clean white shirt, and my father's old bolo tie. As I stepped into the ornate hall beneath the rotunda, I didn't feel small. I felt home. Governor Mason shook my hand in front of the cameras. He handed me a plaque. Howard Jenkins, for courage in the face of corporate greed, and for preserving the soul of Texas. People cheered. The reporters shouted questions. One asked, "Mr. Jenkins, what do you say to other people who are scared to fight for their land?" I looked him in the eye and said, "The land can't speak, but you can, so speak louder than the money." But as I rode home that night, my phone buzzed. A message from Catherine. "Howard, just found out Brickwell Holdings purchased the empty 10-acre lot just north of your border. They're moving fast." The lot just north of my border had always been a patch of untamed land, thick with mesquite trees, rocky hills, and wildflowers that danced in the breeze. It was never much use for farming, too uneven, too dry, but it was mine by sight. I'd watched over it for years, like a neighbor who keeps an eye on the empty house next door. Now it had a new owner. Brickwell Holdings. But unlike Linton Ridge or Karen's dirty little HOA, these folks didn't bother with meetings, letters, or even pretending to be friendly. No handshakes, no howdy neighbor. They came in like ghosts. One day, the lot was empty. The next, bulldozers showed up at sunrise. No permits posted, no announcements. Just machines and men in hard hats tearing down trees, flattening the earth, drilling stakes. I drove my old Ford up to the edge and stepped out with a thermos of coffee in one hand and a camera in the other. A young guy in a neon vest spotted me. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yeah," I said, raising my voice over the rumble of engines. "You got a work order, permit, site plan?" He looked around nervously and shrugged. "I just dig the holes." Typical. I turned on my camera and recorded everything. The machinery, the vehicles, even the delivery trucks with no logos. Just unmarked white rigs dropping off pallets of materials. That evening, I sent everything to Catherine. Next morning, she called sounding sharp and alert. They're using a loophole, bought the land under a temporary development designation for agricultural research. That means they can dig without permits, for now. For how long? I asked. Up to 60 days. After that, they have to submit full development plans, and that's when we strike. I paused. What if we don't wait? She went silent for a second. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I build a fence. By the next afternoon, I'd gathered 6 volunteers, farmers, friends, and even 2 green pasture residents who'd been on my side since day one. We began measuring out the shared border between my land and Brickwell. I wasn't going to stop them from building, but I'd make sure that every inch of my land was locked down tight and that the boundary was unmistakable. Right through where they were staging equipment. We built a double-layered fence, reinforced with treated pine and steel wiring. Every 10 feet, we posted custom signs. Private property, trespassers will face legal and media consequences. And beneath that, this fence is backed by federal rulings and the Texas Land Heritage Act. I wasn't just sending a message. I was declaring war, with pen, post, and pride. On the fourth day, they responded. I was tightening a wire by the east post when I heard tires grind to a stop. A sleek black Lincoln SUV. A man stepped out, no hard hat this time. Tall, pale, dark gray suit, no tie, thin mustache, sunglasses. He moved slow, deliberate, like he was used to rooms going quiet when he walked in. "Mr. Jenkins," he said, voice like cold glass. "My name is Lawrence Crane. I represent Brickwell Holdings." I leaned on my post driver and gave him a nod. "You fellas sure do have a talent for showing up late and digging fast." He gave a tight smile. "We're aware of your presence." "Good," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked around the fence. "You're obstructing our logistics corridor. Our trucks need access to the southern entry path. This fence, while legal, is disruptive to our timeline." I grinned. "That's the point." Crane's smile vanished. "We're prepared to make an offer." I crossed my arms. "Name your price, Mr. Jenkins. We'll triple what Linton Ridge offered." I stared at him for a long second. Then I stepped forward until I could see my reflection in his sunglasses. "Your money can't buy memory, and it sure as hell can't buy integrity." He didn't flinch. "You understand this makes you a target, don't you?" "I've been a target since the day Karen Bailey called the sheriff on me for plowing my own damn field." He adjusted his cuffs. "You'll regret this." "No," I said, "you will." The next morning, I woke up to chaos. My creek was filled with concrete. That shallow stream at the back of my property, the one that ran through a small ravine and fed the lower pasture, was gray, thick, and dead. I followed the trail upstream, and sure enough, it originated from Brickwell's land. Someone had dumped wet cement runoff from their foundation work. Deliberately, quietly, they were poisoning the land. I called Catherine, then the sheriff, then the EPA. Yes, the Environmental Protection Agency. Because dumping concrete into a natural water line, that's not just a civil violation. It's federal crime. The feds moved fast. Within 72 hours, Brickwell's site was shut down pending investigation. Workers were escorted off by local deputies. News trucks arrived the next morning. Another headline hit the air. Corporate developer faces federal probe after rancher exposes environmental damage. But it didn't end there. I dug deeper into Brickwell. And what we found? Massive land fraud cases in New Mexico and Arizona. Bribes to zoning boards in Alabama. And in Texas. They'd been quietly trying to buy up land around state-protected properties, then force adjacent owners to sell under environmental distress or legal exhaustion. They weren't developers. They were land pirates. Governor Mason himself called me 2 days later. "Howard," he said, "I've issued a full-stop order. Brickwell Holdings is now blacklisted from state development projects until this investigation ends. You've done Texas proud again." I didn't say much. Just thanked him and looked out over my field. 2 weeks later, I walked the perimeter of the northern fence with a dozen volunteers. This time, I wasn't just securing a border. I was raising a symbol. We hoisted a new sign right at the center post, painted in bold white letters against red cedar. This land was almost stolen, but it stood, and so did we. The Jenkins Ranch, Est 1929. We had a picnic that day. Kids ran in the fields. The community brought food. Someone played fiddle. It didn't feel like a victory party. It felt like a homecoming. But that night, as I closed my gate and turned off the porch light, I saw a figure in the distance, far beyond the fence line. Just watching. Not Karen. Not Crane. Someone else. It was near midnight when I saw him just beyond the tree line on the northern ridge, a shadow in the moonlight, still watching. I didn't move, didn't shout. I just gripped the railing of my porch and waited. Eventually, the figure turned and disappeared into the dark. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe a deer hunter strayed too far. Maybe one of those conspiracy podcasters who'd been camping near the Jenkins Ranch sign, hopping to catch the fence legend in the wild. But when I walked the Northfield with my dog, Buckshot, I found something. Another red survey marker, tied to a tree just beyond the fence. Smaller this time, unlabeled, and this one had a GPS tag clipped to it. They weren't done. I called Catherine. I thought Brickwell was out, I said. They are, she replied, at least on paper, but they're good at hiding behind shells. This could be someone else, one of their spin-off entities. She sighed. Howard, they're hopping to outlast you. I was quiet. She said it gently. They think you're old, that if they wait long enough you'll sell, or your heirs will, or someone'll slip up. She wasn't wrong. They weren't just trying to take my land. They were betting on time to do the dirty work. That night I sat at my father's old desk and stared at the photo of my grandfather plowing the field in 1931. I thought about everything we'd been through. Karen, Tyler, Linton Ridge, Brickwell, the fire, the lawsuits, the fake cottage proposal, the hidden survey teams. And then I opened my notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote, "How to beat time." Over the next 2 weeks, I did something bold. I created the Jenkins Legacy Charter. With Catherine's help, I set up a legal structure that would outlive me, a land trust with specific provisions that made the ranch untouchable for at least 5 generations. No one could sell it. No one could build on it. And if any descendant tried, ownership would immediately revert to a community board formed from the town's most trusted leaders. But I didn't stop there. I partnered with 3 local schools, a veterans group, and the Texas Agricultural Heritage Museum. We turned 30 acres of the ranch into a living historical center. Field trips would visit the barns. Veterans could garden in peace. Local kids would learn how to plant, weld, and care for land with their hands. It became more than protection. It became purpose. When news got out, the governor called again. "You just made it impossible for anyone to touch that ranch without starting a war," he said, laughing. Reporters came again. This time, the headline read, "Jenkins Ranch becomes first multi-generation protected heritage site in Texas history." And underneath, "They can wait on me all they want. This land isn't for sale. Howard Jenkins." Brickwell ghosted. The man in the trees never returned. The survey flags stopped appearing. And after a few quiet months, we knew. They gave up. That fall, I hosted the first Jenkins Ranch Harvest Day. Hundreds came. Families picked apples, ate stew from cast-iron pots, and listened to bluegrass bands under the stars. Melissa read a poem her son wrote about the fence that beat the storm. Curtis gave a toast with sweet tea and declared me the toughest fence post in the state. And I just watched the children run through the orchard. The air smelled like smoke and soil and cinnamon. I could hear my father's laugh in the wind, my mother's voice in the branches, my grandfather's boots in the dirt. I'd built a fence, but I hadn't just kept the bad out. I'd kept the good in. And that made all the difference. A month later, I got one last letter. It was handwritten. No company logo, no legal header. "Mr. Jenkins." I was one of the contractors on the Brickwell project. I quit after I learned what they were trying to do. I just wanted to say, "Thank you. You reminded me what land means, what fighting for something honest looks like." I'm moving back to my hometown to help rebuild my grandfather's orchard. You lit a fire under me, thought you should know. Nick. Sometimes the world doesn't need a hero with a cape. Sometimes it just needs an old man with a fence. That's the story. From the first stake to the last post. From Karen's clipboard to Capitol speeches. From theft to legacy. And me. I'm still here. Still walking the fence line every morning. Still sipping sweet tea on my porch. Still waving at the kids running up the hill shouting, "Hey, Mr. Jenkins." Because this land stands for something. And as long as it does, so will I. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments and tell me, what would you protect no matter the cost? Thank you for following this journey to the end. Speech balloon, would you like a summary, image prompts, or a thumbnail text for this full 10-chapter story?